Hola, everybody. Welcome to the Chats with Yvonne podcast, where we talk about public speaking con cultura. Today's podcast episode is dedicated to speaking off the cuff. And it's actually inspired by a consulting session that I had recently where we went over different frameworks for how do I answer, how do I communicate effectively, efficiently in those moments where I don't have time to prepare. So we're going to go into that. I'm going to walk you through some frameworks for your answers, as well as give you specific examples depending on various situations. For example, in scenarios, for example, you're at a strategy meeting, maybe it's a one-on-one with a manager, maybe it is a presentation followed by a Q&A, maybe it's a panel. So we're going to go through those different frameworks. But before we do that, como siempre, let's pull out from the Public Speaking con Cultura practice card deck. And today I'm kind of feeling an affirmation. So let's see, a ver qué nos toca. No sé, lately I've been doing a lot of behind the scenes work. And with entrepreneurship, it's so much about facing yourself and those mental barriers, healing certain parts of healing the parts of yourself that you've been operating with. And I say operating with because there are certain things that I have just been dealing with, but not necessarily addressing and getting to the root of. And it feels like entrepreneurship calls for me to do that. Every day is a lesson in who is Yvonne? Who does Yvonne want to be? How does Yvonne show up? What is my vision for the world, for my work? How do I continue to elevate public speaking con cultura while at the same time knowing and understanding and balancing that not everything is content, not everything needs to be shared, and just because it's not shared with the world, it doesn't mean that it's not happening. So, por esa razón, ocupo an affirmation today. So let's see. This one is fitting. I learn from my mistakes. Siempre aprendo de mis errores. And this is true. We learn from mistakes. It's the same with your public speaking journey. You may go up on stage for the very first time, or maybe for the 50th time, and you make a mistake. Well, guess what? You're going to learn from it. And I know that it sounds so cliche, but there is something specific that I want you to think about when you make a mistake on stage or in any capacity, but specifically on stage, because we talk about public speaking here. Think about, what was that mistake? What was that mistake? First of all, what did I actually say or do? What did my body feel while I was making, quote unquote, that mistake? Did I see any reactions out in the audience when I made that mistake? Because analyzing the situation will often, one, make us come back to reality and realize that maybe what we saw as a mistake wasn't fully a mistake, but that those mess ups we can learn so much from and take them with us as a tool for growth for the next time that we talk about this same thing, or the next time that we take the stage. In relation to what I was talking about earlier with entrepreneurship and having my own business y toda la cosa, o sea, there's lots of moments of doubt and moments where I'm like, did I make a mistake? Was this launch not successful because I didn't put my all into it? Did I make some kind of mistake here? Little things, even like that calendar invitation. Did I not send it out properly? O sea, ¿qué onda conmigo? ¿Qué onda con tu vida, Yvonne? I constantly feel like that every single day. And it's been something that I need to intentionally be more aware of so that I'm not as hard on myself, but also not give myself too much slack, if that makes sense. So, bueno, I'll end it there so that we can get right into the podcast episode. But if you made a mistake, if you feel like, ¿qué onda con tu vida? I want you to know that I'm right there with you and we got this. O sea, somos hechas de, no sé, de lo que sea más fuerte en este mundo, de eso somos hechas. Y a veces we fall apart, but we can always get ourselves back up. And when you do, and you do it on your own time, that is okay. That's me saying that to myself. Okay, ahora sí, let's get on with the podcast episode. I want you to think about those moments when you have spoken off the cuff, when you haven't been prepared to public speak, engage in a conversation, and ask yourself, am I really speaking off the cuff? What does that actually mean? What does it mean to speak off the cuff? Typically, when you are in situations where you're asked to speak, it's because you have some level of understanding. There's a foundation that you have, or just an overall understanding of this is what we're here to talk about. This is what we're here to do. I don't think that speaking off the cuff means that you're lacking information, which is sometimes what it can feel like. It's like, oh yeah, you asked me a question. I don't know how to respond to that because I didn't have time to prepare for it. So I don't think that the issue is that we don't have the information up here, and it actually might be that we have way too much information and we don't know where to start with our answer. Speaking off the cuff is really about organizing your thoughts in a way that makes sense for the specific situation. So I know that for me, when I have to speak on something that I didn't quite prepare for, my number one fear is rambling, is providing too much information, but also as I'm talking, right? Because when you're asked a question that you weren't necessarily prepared for, our initial reaction is just to start speaking right away. We forget again about the pause, right? But we forget about the pause. We forget that we can say, give me a second to come up with something. Let me think through this. We forget that we can ask a question. We can say, hey, do you want me to speak on this? Or do you want me to speak more on this? So that you can structure your answer a little bit more. But what ends up happening, or what I fear will end up happening, is that because I started speaking right away and trying to answer the question right away, I start rambling a bit until I get to the actual point that I want to communicate. When I could have just paused, thought through it, and then started speaking. And feeling thrown off is normal. You can be the expert in your field. You can be someone that lives and breathes this kind of stuff and still feel caught off guard when you are asked a question that you weren't prepared for. But I hope that we can shift our mindset from I'm not confident speaking off the cuff to I haven't yet practiced organizing my thoughts on the cuff. Because that's what I really think it is. I think it's really important to remember that 1, you're in control of how the information is presented. 2, it is our role as speakers, as communicators, to spark curiosity, meaning you don't have to provide all of the information right away. You can provide just enough for them to ask follow-up questions. And then that leads to it feeling like a conversation anyway, versus a presentation or almost like a test of your knowledge. And 3, this is one of my favorite things, but use your hobbies to help you navigate speaking off the cuff. And here's what I mean by this. I'll link a podcast episode here about how your hobbies can actually help you practice public speaking. I'll link it in the description and show notes of this podcast episode so you can check it out. So I don't go too deep into this rabbit hole. But the things that you really enjoy doing, that bring you comfort, that bring you joy, that don't make you feel like you have to perform, your hobbies, can actually inform the way that you structure your answers or that you practice your public speaking. I always use this as an example because at this point, it's like my entire personality. I have other hobbies, I swear, but maybe actually I'll talk about a different hobby. For example, I do really love writing, and something that I began implementing when I was in meetings and knew that eventually a question would come back to me, or I would at some point have to answer something, speak off the cuff, is I would actually start writing things down, making connections right away from the moment the conversation started. So for example, you're in a room with an executive and your manager, and the executive is talking about a certain project, and there are certain things that they're bringing up about the project that have to do with your line of work, with your work. So what I would do is I would take notes and write bullet points of, hey, if they ask me about this, let me write this down. I have this data point to point to this, so that by the time that they come back around to me and they ask me a question, I can look down at my piece of paper and see what data I can pull from based on what I wrote down. Again, check out the podcast episode because I really walk you through how these hobbies can turn into techniques in the space of public speaking. But this one in particular, you like writing soothes you, you're better able to make connections and organize your thoughts when you write. All right, let's do that during those meetings where you might have to speak, or even as you're preparing for public speaking engagements. Something that I tried the last time that I posted that podcast episode was, if you have a hobby, comment it, let me know in the comments, go to Instagram, go to all the socials and comment your hobbies, and I will give you a technique for practicing public speaking. So if you made it to this part of the podcast episode, please comment your hobby. I would love to create a part 2 of how your hobbies can help you practice public speaking. Anyways, the rest of this podcast episode will be on the 3 frameworks that you can rely on when you're speaking off the cuff. The first framework that we're going to talk about, and I'll give you examples for, is structured around the past, the present, and the future. This can be used when you're explaining a process, pitching an idea, or telling a story even. I like to think of this framework as, por ejemplo, si estás en una junta and you're asked to give us a marketing campaign, a strategy for the marketing campaign moving forward. Your answer can be structured in what has happened in the past, what we are currently experiencing with our overall marketing initiatives and engagement, and where we are looking towards the future. This is very much like the go-to storytelling framework that people share oftentimes, which, again, storytelling is not linear, but sometimes beginning, middle, and end helps us make sense of the information, and that is exactly what these frameworks are meant to do. So again, you get asked a question. In the moment, you're not really sure how to frame it. It's important to assess what kinds of question you're being asked and what the answer should be. In these examples that I'm going to walk you through, they're either explaining a process, pitching an idea, or telling a story. If I'm looking to share a short snippet of my own story, this is how I might introduce myself to an audience that I want to potentially inspire into action. Following the framework of past, growing up, I was terrified of public speaking. I'd avoid presentations, even if it meant losing points in class. True story. Present. Today, I lead workshops on public speaking and help others build their voice con cultura. Future. I'm working on expanding my platform to reach more first-gen Latinas and introverts so they feel empowered with the tools to also speak. I could have provided so much more detail in this answer. If someone asks me, tell me about yourself, or tell me about how you hope to inspire your audiences, I can follow this past, present, and future. And what that does is spark curiosity in people. Like, okay, but tell me more about your future. Or actually, tell me a little bit more about how you started the past. So by structuring your answer in this way, you are providing people almost buckets of information to attach themselves to, engage with, and be curious about, so that it's not all on you to give everything out all at once, and you can take your time and, again, spark curiosity, get people to ask you questions, and then it becomes a little bit more of a conversation and less daunting to speak off the cuff. Scenario number 2, maybe you're pitching a new program to your leadership team. In this case, you might be proposing a new idea or some kind of change. So, using the same framework, the past, we've traditionally relied on quarterly training videos for onboarding. Present, now we're seeing engagement drop and new hires asking for more interaction. Future, I'm proposing a hybrid onboarding series that blends short video intros with live Q&A sessions to build connection and retention. You're acknowledging the current system that is in place and also making a compelling case, or starting to make a compelling case for a more innovative approach that meets your audience where they want to be met, more interaction. Sometimes with this kind of scenario, we feel like we have to over-explain our ideas. I've been there, totally have done that before. But again, if our role is to spark curiosity and help our audience make sense of information, not overload them with information, this structure of past, present, future allows us to start somewhere and then expand throughout the conversation. This one I thought would be fun to do because how many times have we heard the question, tell me about yourself during a job interview? And we're like, okay, what part of myself? Like, you want to know where I grew up? You want to know about my family? You want to know about my favorite color? Like, what do I include in here? So using the same framework, past. I started in customer support, which taught me how to listen closely to user needs. Present. Now I'm managing cross-functional projects where I translate those needs into real product features. Future. I'm excited to bring that experience here where I can grow into a product strategy role and make a broader impact. This answer here shows me reflection, it shows growth, and it also shows me a vision for the future. So you've covered in that, tell me about yourself, what you've done in the past, what you currently do, and how you see yourself contributing to the new role, the new community. And the last scenario that we'll use with this framework will be around communicating data or trends. Sometimes you're in a meeting and someone says, hey, what information do we have about how our social media is performing, or whatever the case is, or email newsletter. So using the same framework, past, in 2022, our email open rates averaged 12%. Present, after refining our segmentation, we've increased open rates to 22% in quarter one. Future, we plan to A/B test interactive email formats to push that number even higher in the next quarter. This answer gives people context for why you're moving forward in a specific way. It also shows growth and momentum. So you are addressing multiple things through this very simple answer. And again, the answer focuses on past, present, and future. The next framework is point, example, point. This is where you want to make a recommendation or an argument for moving forward in a specific way. You might be in a meeting where you have to defend a budget, where you have to say, hey, this is worth the investment. And what this framework allows you to do is emphasize confidence in your direction and clarity in your communication. Let's go through the different scenarios of how we could use it. Number one, defending a team budget or defending a budget in a team meeting. And maybe in this situation, you need buy-in from a certain person in the room. So if we start with point, we need to allocate more budget towards social media advertising. Example, last quarter, we ran a $500 Instagram campaign that outperformed our email blast by 300% in clicks and conversions. Then again, your point, which is meant to reinforce the first point that you made. With increased funding, we can scale what's already working and bring in more leads at a lower cost. So again, you make a point, a case for getting that budget. You give an example of how a moment in an increased budget allowed for higher engagement. And then the last point that you make is just reinforcing the very first thing that you said. Scenario number 2 is you leading a workshop, which I think this framework allows for learning to happen, internalizing what you're saying. So the example is, maybe you're wanting to have your audience understand a certain concept. So the point that you make is authenticity is the most powerful tool you have as a speaker. For example, one of my clients shared her story of failure during a presentation. It made the audience lean in and not pull back. Lastly, point, aka the reinforcer, when you're real, people don't just listen, they connect. Scenario number 3, maybe you are delivering a keynote, and the way that I like to think about these off-the-cuff speaking frameworks that we're talking about is that they can actually form the foundation for the larger presentation, for the longer speaking engagement. So let's say that you are wanting to drive home a particular message during this short talk. Your first point, Latinas don't need to change who they are to lead in corporate spaces. An example, one of the women that I work with decided to use a little Spanglish in her presentation, and her storytelling actually got her the promotion. Point and reinforcer, your voice is your power. It's not something to fix, but rather amplify. I begin and end with a strong conviction in my point and in my belief, and I'm also illustrating impact. Now let's use the same framework for, again, a job interview. Someone asks you, why are you the right fit for this role? Why are you the right candidate? The point, I'm a strong fit for this role because I bring both creativity and structure. Example, At my last job, I built a campaign calendar that increased content output by 40% while leaving room for timely brand moments. Point, and your reinforcer, I'll bring that same balance of innovation and execution to your team. So simple, straight to the point. You didn't ramble, and you made it a point to give data points that actually exemplified what you were attempting to say. So you weren't saying, hey, I'll be a great fit because I know what I'm doing. You gave an example of that. The third and last framework is what I know, what I wonder, and why it matters. These kinds of off-the-cuff framework can be used for when you're brainstorming in the ideation phase for a new project, or when you're simply asked your thoughts, which honestly, these kinds of off-the-cuff questions were always the most difficult for me when I was working in corporate. I was like, wait, you want to know my thoughts? That feels very intimate. I can tell you about the data. I can tell you about this other stuff, but you want my opinion. You want me to showcase my creativity and brainstorm with you, which in here, have always known that I'm very creative and I can come up with great projects. But al momento de estar allí in a room full of people that didn't look like me, sound like me, have similar lived experiences to me, it was really intimidating. So this framework, I think in particular, is very helpful for when you are in these brainstorm sessions, because people want to hear from you. They really do. And they don't know what they don't know. If you don't share your outlook on things, then vamos a seguir en ese mismo ciclo. Scenario number 1. We are brainstorming for a brand awareness campaign. And by the way, a lot of these are social media focused or marketing focused, because this is one of the examples that I just used in my most recent consulting session. So it just was top of mind. But this scenario is for when you aren't necessarily the decision maker, but you want to contribute in a meaningful way. Using the framework, what I know, what I wonder, why it matters. Here we go. What I know. We've seen a spike in engagement when we highlight employee stories on Instagram. This is so true. People love people, by the way. What I wonder if we're underutilizing LinkedIn, especially for positioning ourselves as a thought leader brand. Why it matters. If we expand where we show up, we could reach different segments of our audience more effectively. In this scenario, and the way that you answered it, you sound informed, you sound curious, you sound knowledgeable. You sound like maybe you don't have all of the answers. You haven't yet looked through the data, but it's a good question to propose. It's a good way of, hey, what are your thoughts? Okay, well, this is what I know, this is what I wonder, and this is why I think those two things matter. Scenario number 2, speaking up in a strategy meeting. Oh, all these things are throwing me back and making me so nervous. But again, using the framework, what I know. Our speaking engagements have driven traffic to the site, especially when we mention our services directly. What I wonder if we're tracking which platforms or event types yield the highest conversions. Why it matters. If we knew that, we could prioritize the most effective speaking opportunities next quarter. You are being strategic and also inviting collaboration through this approach. And by the way, side note, corporate companies, I think speakers, I think people have always understood the power of speaking and what it can do for your brand, for your company. But I think now more than ever, executives are looking for these opportunities to share and to be speakers on larger stages, which I think is phenomenal. Y pues va a haber más trabajo y más oportunidades para nosotras. All right, scenario number 3. Maybe you are part of a creative team and you are trying to figure out what next steps are. In particular, I thought about using the podcast example. So here's what I know using the framework. What I know, our audience responds well to behind the scenes or reflective content. I've seen that, by the way, side note, I've seen that be the case with the content that I put out there as well. Here's what I wonder. I wonder how we can package those moments into more bite-sized, shareable formats. So things that happen in the podcast, oftentimes the promo that I share will be those moments where I am a bit more reflective, and then I'll mix it in with some tips, because that is also important. I want you to know that on this platform, on this podcast, we are very reflective. We engage in deep thoughts, and also I provide you tangible things and tools to use in your public speaking. And why it matters. If we make reflection more accessible, we can grow our reach while staying true to our voice. Now, scenario 4, maybe you are in a situation where you have to speak off the cuff and provide someone with feedback. You know that with feedback, you always want to encourage folks instead of shutting them down so that it doesn't feel personal. Using the framework, what I know, you told that story clearly and with a strong sense of structure. This is what I felt from you. This is what I wonder. I wonder how it might land if you added more detail about how you felt in the moment. This is why it matters. The emotional layer helps the audience connect more deeply with your message. This way, you're encouraging growth and also affirming their strengths. Think about when you've been in meetings and you have to provide feedback off the cuff. This particular framework can help with making that strategic, focused, and so that you don't feel like you're rambling or, oh my gosh, am I going to hurt their feelings, or am I trying to overcompensate for the piece of feedback that I have by like almost just playing up too much on their strengths. Not that I think you could do that, but just trying to be overly nice to deliver this piece of feedback. This allows you to keep it structured, say what you need to say, and also provide them the feedback that they need without it, again, becoming too personal. And those are the 3 frameworks that I wanted to go through today. Again, this is more muscle memory. So whenever you are in certain situations, and I'll leave in the description of this podcast episode in the show notes, these frameworks actually written out so that you can take a look at them. But the more that you come back to them, the more that you attach yourself to these frameworks of answering questions, the easier it will be to speak off the cuff. And then eventually you don't even really need to think about it. But I always say at the beginning, we have to put in the work to create a habit. And once that habit is built, then we can start to just really do it off the cuff and not feel like, okay, let me focus on past, present, future. But at the very beginning, it allows us to structure our communication. To recap, we have the framework of past, present, future, which you can use when you're pitching a new idea, talking about strategy, or storytelling in a narrative. The second framework is point, example, end point that reinforces the first point, can be used when you're making a recommendation or want to clearly make an argument for something. And the third framework is for all those moments when you're brainstorming or maybe asked for your thoughts, and that is what I know, what I wonder, why it matters. To implement these frameworks and to feel comfortable in our delivery within them, it is important to practice. So here are a few ways that I think you can practice these at home. Write down real world scenarios of the times where you've had to speak off the cuff, maybe speak without preparation, whether that be at work, on a stage, during a Q&A, a panel, whatever it is. Write those things down specific to you and use one of the frameworks to answer questions that came up for that moment. If you want to get really strategic with it, you can almost time yourself just to make sure that you are efficient, effective in your communication, and you don't take 5 minutes when you could have taken maybe a minute to say something. And sometimes there are those situations where we just have to get to the point. We don't need to add storytelling techniques all the time. We don't need to create a story around the information that we want to share with people. We just, again, want to spark curiosity. And if someone, let's say, is really about the data and they want you to point to the data, you can still embed storytelling in there, but don't tell an entire story without providing the data first, because that may throw someone off and they may be like, okay, you said this story about the people behind the data, but I asked about the data. So you almost want to warm people up, and using these frameworks to help you answer these questions will actually lead to that conversation. Use the framework to provide them the data, and at the very end, also add something about, are you okay with me telling you a little bit about the stories? Or I think that it's really powerful to take a look at some of the stories of the people behind the data. And if you'd like, I can share some of those things with you, whether that is right now or offline via an email. I hope that these frameworks are helpful to you, that you found this podcast episode valuable, and that as you continue to practice them and using these frameworks to answer questions off the cuff, you become more comfortable with it. Because again, you have all of the information. Sometimes we just have too much information and we're not sure how to organize it. And as always, I'd like to end today's podcast episode with our segment Con Cultura. And I wanted to share a little bit about an experience that I had recently speaking, my latest speaking engagement. So recently I have been having a lot of conversations with people in the corporate space around, what does authenticity actually mean? Like, what does that mean? Because if I'm authentic to myself, I don't want to speak. I don't want to share anything. I just want to be left alone and do what I need to do and do my work. But especially being in the corporate space, you understand that talking about the work that you do is important. Knowing how to address, knowing how to speak on certain questions that are asked of you is really, really important. So I want to share this in particular because I think that it is something that I will forever be learning and unlearning. Sometimes I'm like, do I even know what it means to be authentic? Like, what does that actually mean? Tell me what that means. And I think it's also, especially because I was in the tech industry, so that word is thrown around a lot. But I recently booked a new corporate client and I led a workshop for them, which then led to some one-on-ones with team members that were in that call. My initial call with the representative, the team manager, was, hey, we're looking for public speaking consultants. I really want my team to go through a workshop. We kind of talked about what that could potentially look like. And they made it a point to really say that I'm not looking for a cookie cutter public speaking consultant. I want people that can address the needs of my team members, which is feeling like the only of sometimes in a room. Women, dealing with the things that the microaggressions that may exist in the workplace, or dealing with, hey, I don't have this lived experience, so I can't understand how you experience and navigate the world, but I know that there's a difference in the way that you do so. How can I provide you public speaking techniques and consulting that honors that? And so that to me was really powerful because every single time, and this is something that I do constantly, but I always have this pressure of when I am dealing, or when I'm working, partnering with, when I'm working with corporate clients, I almost have this initial reaction of, okay, I need to be this certain way. I need to act this certain way. I need to speak this certain way. And more, I'm realizing that we all need and crave a space where we can just be. Where, yes, I understand that we need to speak. I understand that there are goals and objectives and we have to be able to communicate, but it is not going to work for the audience, in this case, the team, for me to be this person that tells them, hey, you have to move in this way. Hey, you're not doing this. Give me eye contact the entire time that you're speaking. It's just not realistic. And so it felt really good to be in that meeting and be acknowledged, recognized, seen, and actually valued for not being a cookie cutter public speaking consultant. And that gave me the freedom to exist in the way that I do within the space and get creative. And I thought about how much authenticity and being my authentic self can often be tied with permission. Sometimes I wait to get permission and acknowledgement from the person that's hiring me or from the space in order for me to be like, oh, okay, cool. I can let my guard down and be myself, or I can get creative with it. You don't expect this cookie cutter sort of approach to public speaking. You want me to dig into the additional layers of your team's lived experience and bring that to the table and discuss that before we get into the public speaking stuff. And that, on one end, I was like, we need more spaces that just give us the permission explicitly, implicitly, that just give us permission to exist. But at the same time, that tells me that I still have work to do, that I can't just be myself or feel, okay, now I have creative freedom when someone tells me, hey, you have creative freedom, or I want to acknowledge your lived experience. I have to do that for myself too. And so one of the things that I want to challenge us to do today, to think about, to reflect is, am I waiting for permission to exist? Am I waiting for validation that my lived experience and the way that I see the world and the way that my brain works is valid, that it is also needed in these spaces? Or can I actually unlearn the need for that validation, the need for that permission, and just be? Because the reason that people are seeking you out is because you are different. The reason I landed that corporate client is because I am different, because I lead with my introversion. I lead with the fact that I am a Latina and that I see things and have experienced things just a little bit different. And that feeds into my creativity. And that actually allows more people to connect with the art of public speaking, to make it less of a barrier for them to love and engage with the art, even if they don't want to be on stages. There's a job that we all have to do at the end of the day. And if I am a better communicator, if I can be a better communicator because someone acknowledged my lived experiences and used my lived experiences to teach me public speaking, we're all better for that. I hope that public speaking continues to be that tool for you where you're continuously faced with the most authentic version of yourself and with these two options to say, do I exist in this way right now, or should I hold back a little bit? Because that's what public speaking often asks us to do. I have always said that public speaking is actually the one tool that I have used to help me be more authentically myself in all of these different spaces. Because I have control over what is being communicated, how it's being communicated, but also the art of public speaking asks me to engage in deep reflection. And because of that, I'm always faced with these two decisions of, am I going to be myself and let my creativity flow? Or am I going to allow the past experiences to make me feel like I have to show up in this particular way to be taken seriously? So that's just something for us to reflect on as speakers as we continue in our speaking career. With that being said, thank you so much for being here. You didn't have to, but you decided to spend some time with me today, and I appreciate you for that. Thank you. Please share this with someone that you think might find value in it. Remember that if you would like to, comment, DM me, let me know what some of your hobbies are, and I will create a podcast episode, a part 2 of how your hobbies can help you practice public speaking. As always, please check out upcoming events, virtual workshops, in-person events, all around public speaking and helping you practice your public speaking con cultura. Thank you all so much for being here y nos vemos a la próxima. Bye, y'all.